What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, or wherever you are and whatever time it is. Welcome back to yet another video with you, man. I'm Overhaul, and ladies and gentlemen, today we have a brand new update for the Divide Et Impera Overhaul mod for Total War Rome 2. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a new update. Finally, this is the 1.3.1 beta patch that is now out for DEI. We have some big changes, some big roster overhauls in this update. This update is definitely more so towards faction overhauls rather than to gameplay mechanics being altered massively, but you will definitely see some changes on the campaign map as well. So in this video today, I'm going to go over the major highlights out of the update, my personal favorites. I'll also point out some of the more subtle changes that I think are worth noting, as not everything is always going to be big and glorious like a big overhaul. Sometimes the smaller stuff does stand out as well, has a big impact. I will not be going through every single little detail of the update. I will leave that all up to you to discover on your own as you opt in to play it if you do wish to. And so it'll be up to you if you wish to opt into the beta or continue on your current 1.3 DEI campaigns. I know I will be finishing up my Carthage campaign hopefully before the beta is fully released. So anyway, without any further ado, let's jump into talking about the 1.3.1 beta update for the Divide Et Impera. Alrighty everybody, so let's go over the general premise of the update. What is the purpose of it? Let's do a little bit of an overview. Well, overall, in my opinion, it seems that the DEI team is trying to breathe new life into factions that, although they are cool and unique, aren't necessarily the most played factions, or perhaps they're factions that have kind of been left behind in terms of being given lots of attention to details, such as factions like what Rome has. Rome has obviously been given the most amount of work out of any faction in the game. Or in the mod, I should say. However, this update and future updates seem to be aimed at fixing that. Baktria has also been overhauled with some of its units. Not a massive overhaul, but it's still there. Maurya has had a massive amount of changes done to it. It is easily the biggest change in this update. We'll talk a little bit more about that very soon. We also see AOR unit changes, mercenary changes across the map. Naval units have also received a big overhaul. And that also includes Rhodes has received pretty significant changes to its roster based off these naval unit changes, and they also have new bodyguards and whatnot. So essentially we're seeing a lot of changes happening focused around units for certain factions. So while you might not notice massive changes on the campaign map, although there are changes on the campaign map, but you might not notice them as strongly as you would when you get into the battlefield. But we'll talk a bit more about that as time goes on. Another very helpful change is that the Alexander submod campaign has now been added into the base DEI campaign. That means if you want to play as Alexander the Great, you no longer have to download a submod and play that specifically. Instead, you can just go to the campaign selection screen, head on down and click on Alexander, and you'll be able to play as Macedon during the time of Alexander. Currently, there isn't any other playable factions in the Alexander the Great campaign. I'm not sure if there will be more in the future, but I do know that there will be more changes coming to that campaign as time goes on. But obviously, the Grand campaign has the priority for the DEI devs. And then one last kind of thing to add to the overall section is that it seems like this beta is going to last for quite a while. My personal guess is that it's going to be at least a month, maybe two, depending on how much more content is added to this patch. There is no official date or any official word on when it will be released into the base game. But in my opinion, this is good because it means that the beta is going to have less bugs than what it will once it finally gets implemented. So I definitely don't want the devs to rush it. They all know what they're doing, of course, anyway, but it's just something for the players to be aware of course. And to add on to that, the devs also do say that they will be adding more overhauls specifically into this update. So I would definitely expect to see some factions being overhauled. My personal guess would be Parthia. I know that there's been some teasing in the DI Discord of the new Parthian changes. So that's going to be very interesting. I do love Parthia. Anyone who's watched Let's Plays on my channel knows how much I enjoyed and hated that campaign. It was tough. But that's going to be exciting to see what other factions will be overhauled. But anyway, let's get into some more specific changes, specifically regarding Iberia and Baktria. all of the Iberian playable factions have been overhauled to various degrees. All of them have had their visuals updated to basically be more of a higher quality standard like the majority of the other factions. They've also had changes in the categorizing of units. For example, each faction has had a light infantry unit be converted into a heavy skirmisher unit, and there's been stats that have been adjusted appropriately, so now the Iberians will have a little bit more of a chance when it comes to actual fighting and whatnot. Several of the officers and generals have also been overhauled for the Iberians, and there's a host of miscellaneous changes that have creeped into the Iberian rosters right now. I'm not going to go into massive detail about them, but it is very exciting because that's an area of the map that's definitely left to be a little bit lackluster, in my opinion. Even though there's a lot of fighting that goes on between Rome and Carthage in the west, the Iberian factions are definitely not the most popular factions that people are interested in, and then probably never going to be. But it is good when these lesser tier factions get promoted up a little bit and they get that little extra kind of detail that puts them at least somewhat on par with some of the more popular factions. Baktria, as I said, also have some pretty decent changes. The big thing you'll notice with Baktria is the unit cards have been overhauled. They look beautiful now, very gorgeous work. We also see some different statistics being adjusted for those units. There is one particular new unit, the City and Settlers. These guys, they look very interesting to me, and they seem like they're going to be the next unit that you have to use as Baktria. They look extremely powerful, 300 men per unit, very good stats overall, just an excellent good tier unit. They're not elite tier, but they're good tier. I'm making that up as a thing right now, but seriously though, they look very interesting, and all of the unit cards for Baktria are looking nice. They haven't all completely changed, but there's definitely some changes there. The biggest change to Baktria though is how they get access to the Mauryan/Indian units. Instead of just being recruited through barracks like they typically would, you now have to follow the new Buddhist building chain. So if you want to recruit these Buddhist units, you have to actually cater to them, and so you need to invite them into your kingdom by building the Buddhist buildings. Basically, for each different tier of the Buddhist building chain, you get different units. So for the second one is where you will get the glorious Mauryan longbowmen. That's the unit that made Baktria so powerful, in my opinion, because Baktria already had a great roster, but then they get those really nice archers from the Indians. So you can get them, but you have to work a little bit more for it now. So I actually like that. It's a very nice balance, in my opinion. Tier 3 of the Buddhist building chain gives you the Mauryan Guildsmen, one of the best shock infantry units in the game. So you can still get those really good Mauryan units as Baktria. You just got to put in a little bit more time, money, and effort overall. Anyway, let's move on to my biggest highlight of this update. Alright everybody, drum roll please. We have the Mauryan Overhaul. I've said it a few times now. They have had some massive changes in this update. Absolutely blown away by how good looking all of the Mauryan units are now. I will be showing you guys some footage of these bad boys. I will not be going into specific details of every single unit. I am going to save that for a faction overview. That's why we're going to redo the faction overview for Maurya, as we are doing for some other factions. That series has been put on hold, but it will be starting back up, so don't worry. If you sub for that, it is on its way, and Maurya won't be far away. The amount of changes that have happened to the faction is just staggering, at least in terms of its roster. It feels like it's brand new, but there's still definitely the units from before. There's some new units, and the units have had their statistics and visuals completely overhauled. All of their units look amazing now, very unique. There even is this new era of Imperial units that set themselves apart so drastically from like the lower tier tribesmen units, for example. They really stand out, and then when you're playing as Maurya, you really do feel like you're the vanguard of the Mauryan Empire that is actually inside of India itself. Because that's the idea of the Mauryan faction in DEI, is that you're basically operating as the fringes of the Mauryan Empire that's currently ruling in India. So it's very fitting that you do get access to Imperial level units. You just get them a little bit later on in the campaign, and they look amazing. Very, very impressed with them. We also have new units in the core region of where the Mauryans start. That's basically in terms of mercenary units have been overhauled, and AOR units are a little bit different in the area, and also the garrisons have been adjusted for that area specifically. There are new reforms for the Mauryans based on converting nomadic lands. I'm not going to go into details about that, spoil anything, but that's going to be very interesting. Perhaps it will help boost your lack of cavalry, because the Mauryans actually do kind of lack cav now. Before they had basically everything they needed, whereas now it seems like the cavalry is still present and still good, very good, but you will be relying on using the nomads and perhaps Baktria and Greek troops to supplement your cavalry detachments a little bit. And then we have another big change, which is the major military building chains for Maurya have been divided into 3 different building chains. We have one set of building chains dedicated to your elephants and your cavalry. We then have another for just infantry on their own, all different types of infantry. And then for your last one, we have chariots and siege equipment. And I say chariots with an S, as in plural, because there are 2 different types of chariots that you can choose from. Very exciting. Very, very cool. I love the little umbrella style chariots. Very cool. I'm sure there's a better word for it, but that's the way I'm calling them, umbrella chariots. And then the Mauryans also do get their own Buddhist temple building chain. It doesn't add new units to them because obviously they're already a Buddhist faction, so they have access to those units, such as the Mauryan longbowmen. By the way, there are now 4 types of archers for the Mauryans. Incredible. All very, very cool. But yeah, we have this new building chain that gives a lot of big buffs to the region that you build it in, and it helps your faction overall. It almost acts as like a wonder, really. It has some really nice benefits, and it is just a no-brainer. You will want to build it. It will hurt your regional income a little bit, but in my opinion, it should be worth the cost. But that's up to you and how you run your campaign, of course. But anyway, we're going to start to try to wrap up this video now. Like I said, I didn't want to go into every little single detail there is, and we will go through one final section though, which is some other cool changes that I think are worth mentioning. The reforms for all factions that relied on the Greek global reforms have been altered. Nothing too crazy. Basically what has been changed is that they will now occur 4 turns after the normal Greek global reforms would trigger. Basically this results in reducing bugs and issues with reforms. Sometimes you would have reforms and you still couldn't recruit units. It was pretty rare, and I never personally had that issue, but I know some people have complained about it on the Total War Center forums and in Discord, so hopefully that will help out reforming units. I mentioned slightly earlier that Rhodes has been buffed. That's because they have a new bodyguard unit, a new hoplite slinger marine unit. All ships, including the Rhodian ships, but all ships across the campaign map have had their recruitment costs changed. Ramming damage and HP for all ships has been changed. And there's just a host of more naval changes. And obviously that's going to tie heavily into Rhodes as a faction, but every other faction in the campaign has been touched by this naval update. I'm not really too sure on the consequences of this naval update. It seems as though combat is going to be a little bit more impactful. I'm not too sure to what degree, and to be honest, it might even be worth warranting just doing a video on its own dedicated to the Navy and naval combat in general in DEI. I'll have to do a little bit more research into that one, but it is exciting to see that at least the Navy is getting some love, because naval combat is definitely a bit of a hate-love relationship in DEI. Those of you who know. Anyway, and one of the last final points is that AOR mercenary units belonging to the cultures of the Britons, the Iberians, the Gauls, the Alpine region, the Celts, Germans, and Galatians have been overhauled in various ways. Some have been overhauled with visuals, some have been overhauled with statistics, some have a mixture. It's not exactly completely uniform, the changes, but all of those different cultural regions have had some pretty big changes to their units. So that's going to be exciting when you're fighting in those areas, because all of those places I listed, they are barbarian places. And so typically the barbarians struggle to have unique or cool looking units. DEI has done an amazing job in making the barbarian factions cool, but it's still not as badass as say a Spartan hoplite. So hopefully we'll see even more badass eye candy for the barbarians. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to some final thoughts on this video. I wanted to try and make it as short as possible. I just want basically to get the word out there to you all that the new beta is out. It's time to get excited for it. DEI is still going strong. It's been 9 years of Total War Rome 2 being out. DEI is still pushing the game to new heights, and so in these final thoughts I basically want to give a massive shout out to the DEI team, as I do in every update, even when there isn't changes that I necessarily agree with, because it's not always like that. But I know the DEI team does excellent, very high quality work. They put in a lot of time, a lot of love and passion into it as well. And so I'm incredibly grateful to them for their hard work, and I hope you all are as well, and we all show appreciation for that. Still give them constructive criticism, of course, but without DEI, I would not be playing Rome 2 anymore. I can't stand vanilla Rome 2. If you can, props to you, but I can't. I would just be finding somewhere else to get my historical fix filled. But yeah, this update is looking fantastic, and even though the changelog isn't really all that long necessarily, at least compared to some other updates, this is still going to be very game-changing in my opinion, which is always fun. I love seeing the game change. The game's developing. It's not going backwards, it's going forwards, and these changes are going to do nothing but that, which is excellent in my opinion. Especially for you Mauryan lovers out there. There's going to be a lot of new Mauryan campaigns starting up, and to be honest, I'm even tempted to start up a Mauryan campaign. Let me know if you're interested in that down below, by the way. But anyway, I think one thing to note about this update though is that you will notice the majority of the changes on the battlefield. There are some other changes that you will see on the campaign map, such as Carthage having its harbor now visible. You will also see that for armies, you have the supply statistics and information in the top right corner of where you select your general. So it's a little bit easier to read and easier to follow along with, but it's not going to be game changing necessarily in that manner. It's just going to be a nice quality of life change. And to finally end this video, I want to read out the credits that the DEI team gives in their changelog. This is not my credits by any means, but I will read it out because everyone who has contributed to this update and all other DEI updates deserves to be acknowledged and shouted out for. Just as a final reminder, I will be leaving a link to the webpage for DEI where you can come and check out the notes yourself if you want to know every single little detail. But for the credits, we have summary for many UI elements and new models. Thank you, Summary, my man. Big member of the Overhaul community. Appreciate you, my mate. Skillful Tree for various UI and model additions. Litharium for all the supply overhaul changes, as always. Huge thanks. Swaraj for the Mauryan Overhaul and reform script changes. Swaraj coming in heavy with the Mauryan Overhaul. And then we have Sheep Cloaks from GAC. We then have Cusatorius and Kemen for Iberian AOR/Mercenary Naval and a ton of other changes. We then have Benjamin, who contributed with the Corfin port model, and Cam for the Baktria overhaul and battle updates. I'm sure there are many others who have contributed as well. I personally want to thank the DEI team again. I'm just very grateful that we still, after all these years, have such an incredibly high quality mod, making this game even more and more playable, and there's no reason for me to go to any other historical game when we got Divide Et Impera. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I really do hope this video has helped you get into the know and get you hyped up for the new DEI update. I'm incredibly excited, and I'm really looking forward to doing more videos covering more of the changes for you all. Like I said, keep an eye out for those faction overviews. We'll be checking out Maurya in the near future, but first we got a couple of barbarian factions to knock out. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.